On July 12, 2020, in the aftermath of the tragic death of George Floyd on May 25, 2020, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by law enforcement officers, the DBA and the allied bars passed a joint resolution reaffirming commitment to social and racial justice, which also announced the formation of an allied Dallas Bars Equality Task Force. Through the joint resolution, the DBA and the allied bars reaffirmed their collective commitment to preserve the constitutionally protected right of peaceable assembly, to promote equality and social justice, and to pursue tangible progress through words and deeds towards a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive society. The Allied Dallas Bars Equality Task Force was converted to the Allied Bars Standing Committee on Equality, affectionately known as the Equality Committee, which in January 2021 began working through call to action items that had been identified by the task force. Our program today is part of that work. My name is Ashley Wright, and I am privileged to be here as one of the co-chairs of the Programming Committee for the Equality Committee, along with Callie Franks, under the leadership of Coy Lomas and Katie Anderson. Today's program serves as part 2 to our DEI book club, and today's book focus will be Denial, Holocaust History on Trial. But as you will quickly see and learn, today's program is going to expand far beyond the covers of the book. And instead, we are going to dive into discussions on anti-Semitism and what we can do collectively to ensure that the hate plaguing our nation comes to an end. As part of this program today, we not only have some fantastic speakers and moderators who will be introduced later, but we also want to recognize the co-sponsors of this event: the Dallas Bar Association, the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies at the University of Texas at Dallas, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, and Texas Holocaust Genocide and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. Of course, as attorneys, we are all interested in not only the knowledge that's going to come out of today's program, but also CLE credit. So the code will be provided toward the end of this program, and you will receive 1.5 hours of DEI credit. Now, before I hand it over to our moderator, I want to also mention that during this program, even though it is virtual, we still hope to have and create a safe space for all those who are participating and engaging even via Zoom. So when you are thinking about the questions that you pose to our moderators and the questions that you hope are asked and answered here today, think about the fact that you want to make sure everyone is comfortable expressing themselves and to be able to share their experiences without fear of discrimination or reprisal. So we thank you for your attendance via Zoom of this program. And I will now hand it over to Gary Lawson, who made this program, along with his co-moderator Charles, a reality. And of course, he didn't want me to give too long of an introduction, but I thank them both for their vision and for their efforts here. And of course, I will recognize Gary as one of the pioneers of the Dallas Bar Association's Employee Benefits Committee. And that's where he told me to stop. So I will now hand it over for the real reason you are here. So Gary, over to you.
Ashley, thank you so very much. And our deepest thanks to the Dallas Bar Association, its leadership, the Equality Committee, inviting us to discuss anti-Semitism, and Professor Deborah Lipstadt's book, one of her books, but Denial, Holocaust History on Trial. We're really blessed for the Dallas Bar Association. I think we're probably one of the first, if not the first, bar association to tackle the subject of anti-Semitism today. Emory University Professor Lipstadt, publisher with Penguin Press, were sued in 1996 for defamation, but in England, under British law, by an author, David Irving, for her writing in her earlier book, Denying the Holocaust, calling David Irving a Holocaust denier. The lawsuit was a bullying tactic. It was an attack on the First Amendment, and it was tried under British law, where the defendant, unlike United States laws, the defendant must prove the essential truths of all of the allegations she made. There are, by the way, lawyers, there are rarely juries in England. All right, that's an interesting difference. Another interesting difference is that judges are called from special skill sets. So the particular judge in this case was a jurist who is expert in defamation law. Irving's writings, and he wrote many books, largely portrayed Nazi Germany military and political history in World War II in a very, very favorable light. His books included The Destruction of Dresden, Hitler's War, Churchill's War, Goebbels, Mastermind of the Third Reich. And in most of his works, Irving argued that Adolf Hitler did not know about the extermination of Jews, or if he did, that Adolf Hitler opposed it. Irving had become a frequent speaker in anti-Semitic circles, often quoted as saying, "There were no gas chambers or mass exterminations at Auschwitz." He went so far as to say that some survivors had fake tattoos put on their arms after the war. For those who know anything about the Jewish faith, they would know that most Jews consider tattooing the defacing of a body that God created, and we had no right to do so. Irving had been expelled from a number of European countries for his extremist views. I think one of them was Germany. He, again, sued Professor Lipstadt in England. I'll tell you an interesting survey study in 2020, 63% of millennials and Gen Zs in the United States said that there weren't 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. Over half of them came up with a number under 2 million. Nearly half of those who were surveyed couldn't mention the name of one concentration or death camp. 20% of the millennials in New York and Gen Zs in New York said that the Jews had caused the Holocaust. The rise of anti-Semitism in America, on American colleges, American campuses, in the streets, has risen dramatically. Lipstadt's book, Denying the Holocaust, again, called out David Irving as a Holocaust denier. I'm going to introduce to you, on my right is my co-moderator, Charles Pulman, whose wisdom single-handedly helped pull together the amazing panel you'll meet today. Charles practiced law in Dallas since 1977. He's an attorney with the Dallas law firm of Meadows, Collier, and is active in local, national, and international organizations fighting against anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism. Those of you who are watching us today will be able to, on your computers, send in written questions, which will come to Charles, and we will, towards the end of the panel discussions, see how many we can present to our panelists. Our speakers today, let me introduce them first. Two of them are here with us right now. One of them is in Israel. Dr. David Patterson, on my far right, your left, is a Distinguished Chair of Holocaust Studies at the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies at the University of Texas, Dallas. It's been a leading program in the United States for, I think, 35 years. Yes. Dr. Patterson has published more than 35 books. Many of us haven't read that many books this year. More than 200 articles on the topics of literature, philosophy, the Holocaust, and Jewish studies. Next to him, in the middle here, is Pastor Dumisani Washington, the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, whose latest book is now in its second edition, Zionism in the Black Church: Why Standing with Israel Would Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. And Pastor Washington flew in yesterday, and with the generous support, I'd like to thank Adam and Gila Milstein's Family Foundation, who's supporting our work today and helped us bring Pastor Washington here. And I'd also like to thank, by the way, the Dallas Boutique Lorenza Hotel, which opened in 2017, which provided Pastor Washington a guest stay at the hotel. And for historians on Dallas, I would just like to mention, it's interesting that the late, recently departed Tina Turner, when she escaped abuse from her husband while she was on tour in Dallas, didn't have any money. And she went to the predecessor, a precursor to that hotel, and the hotel put her up in the presidential suite for free. So there's something historical about that hotel and about freedom. I'd like to now turn the talk over to Dr. Sara Abosch-Jacobson, who is with us today from Israel. For more than 11 years, Dr. Sara Abosch-Jacobson has been the Chief Educational Officer at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And with that, Sara, we turn to you, please.
Thank you so much for putting this panel together. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Dallas Barr, and of course Gary, Charles, and my co-panelists. So today I'm only going to talk to you for about 15 minutes because we're going to try and keep these sections moving along so that you have a chance to ask, and we can answer your questions at the end of this session. So in theory today, we're talking about Deborah Lipstadt's book, Denial, Holocaust History on Trial. And I am assuming that most of you have either read her book or you have watched the fairly recent movie starring Rachel Weisz, which does a fairly good job at portraying the book. The book is fascinating, as Gary was saying. You have an American academic who writes a book in 1993 on denying the Holocaust. One of the people that she writes about in her book in 93 is a man named David Irving, who calls himself an historian. He actually never finishes college, but he has written several books on Hitler and on aspects of the Holocaust. By 1993, he has an active speaking life across North America and throughout Europe about the work that he has undertaken. And in 94, a British version of her book on denying the Holocaust, Deborah Lipstadt's book on denying the Holocaust, comes out in the UK. And it's at that point that Irving, using British law, is able to begin to move against her. By 95, he has sent to Penguin via his complaint that he's accusing her of defamation. And by 96, the case is actually filed and it goes to court. What this does, and what the book does beautifully, and by the book I'm talking about Denial, so the book we're discussing today does really beautifully, is to kind of take you through the backstory of how you get to that point. Then take you through the 4 years of preparation that Deborah Lipstadt does with a really amazing legal and research team that is cobbled together. And then through the actual trial that runs from January 11th, 2000 to till April 11th, 2000, and then through what happens after that, the judgment that emerges, the 3 separate appeals that are filed by Irving, and then ultimately the acceptance of the 3rd appeal by an appeals court in London, and the loss of that appeal by Irving. And what's amazing about this book is that I found myself, as I was reading it, being edge of my seat. And I have to tell you, I know how it ends. So there were no surprises there. And by way of full disclosure, I should also say that in 2000, while this case was going on in London, I was actually in London doing research for my dissertation. I spent that year there and walked by the Inns of Court and never went in. I knew the case was going on, and I told myself every day when I passed, I don't have the time to stop and try and fight my way in. And now, having read the book, and I knew the story, but having actually read the book and really thought about it more extensively, I'm kind of kicking myself. But that's just an aside. What Lipstadt's book does, and what Deborah Lipstadt does, is she really gives the reader a master class in the art of history and in the art of historical research. She really covers what standards of scholarship are historically, what the historical approach is to the subject matter, how historians go about locating and assessing evidence, sorting through evidence, making sense of evidence, and then putting together a coherent, factually based and truth-based narrative based upon what they have found in the archives. And in many ways, that is a variation, and I say this obviously as a non-lawyer, but that is a variation on what lawyers who put together a case are doing as well. In putting together this particular case, she and her legal team work with a staff of Holocaust historians and other specialists. That's really a who's who of people who work in this field. And what they do is they ultimately have to prove not the truth of what David Irving is saying, but the truth of what Deborah Lipstadt said, which is that David Irving was a denier of the Holocaust, something that he says he was not. So that leads me to, I guess, the next area that we should probably talk about, which is Holocaust denial. And Holocaust denial is something that has existed almost since the end of the events that constitute the Holocaust. And I guess you can argue even during the Holocaust's perpetration itself, there are efforts made on the part of the Nazi hierarchy to cover what it is that they're doing, the mass murder of 6 million Jews, because denial is one of the stages of genocide, as Dr. Gregory Stanton, who came up with the prognostication and educational tool called the 10 stages of genocide. One of the stages of genocide is denial. And if you see denial of events having happened like this frequently, that is actually evidence along the lines of denial having occurred. So let's talk very quickly about Holocaust denial. What is it? And let's also talk about its somewhat poorer cousin, Holocaust distortion. And the thing that links Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion is where we started with Ashley's remarks earlier. It's anti-Semitism, and so it's the hatred of Jews, the notion of Jews as world-class conspirators. That is what links the two of these things. So Holocaust denial is the notion that the Holocaust is a pure myth or fabrication by the Allies, by the Allied forces during World War II and by the Jews. It is the belief that the Holocaust against the Jews was not perpetrated by the Nazis during World War II. It's the belief that Germans were victims of Jewish conspiracy during World War II. It's the belief that Hitler did not seek the extermination of European Jews, that Jews are, as a whole, liars, fabricators, myth makers, victimizers of others, and that they bring what little may have happened to them under the cover of war upon themselves. And again, this is a very kind of gross simplification of this, but just to give you a sense of what we're talking about and what Lipstadt was accusing Irving of in calling him a denier. The other part of this, as I say, kind of the poorer cousin, is Holocaust distortion, which is to blame the Jews or to excuse or minimize Jewish death, to excuse the Jews of using the Holocaust, profiting from the Holocaust for their own ends, to say that, yes, maybe some Jews died, but it was many, 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 many fewer Jews than is commonly given as the number of 5.5 to 6 million who were murdered. It's to say that some of the Jews may have died, but they were not deliberately targeted by Hitler and the Nazis and their allies. This simply was something that occurred during the course of a war that was being propagated. I mean, the current term would be they were collateral damage. And it goes beyond that to using the Holocaust by politicians. I'll give you a current day example. Many of those who opposed COVID vaccination used the Holocaust, a distortion of the Holocaust, to promote their view that this was requiring Americans to get vaccinated was akin to the Nazis requiring Jews to be badged during the Holocaust. There's no connection between these two things, but it's this notion that you can distort the Holocaust and what happened for your own ends. What was so fascinating about the Lipstadt trial is that she talks in her book about the internet, about having access to email, about reading news on the internet. But what we have to keep in mind is that she is on trial in 2000. 2000 barely marks the dawn of the social media explosion that we come to recognize with Facebook, with Twitter, with MySpace, with WhatsApp, with Instagram, with Telegraph, with all kinds of sources of information. And then, of course, the dark web kind of underlying some of this. None of that really exists when she is going through this. And so the kind of explosion that we've witnessed in the past 15 to, I guess, 15 years, because it's mid-2000s when most of this comes on, and the explosion of hatred and vitriol and racism and anti-Semitism and this kind of witch's brew does not yet exist. So this was a time in our history where it was possible to kind of focus on somebody like Irving and ignore a lot of the extraneous noise that exists now and that comes at people from all different directions. And so in many ways, going after Irving as a denier is going after somebody in what was a simpler time and a simpler era, even though it's so close to our own. So the book goes into the discussion of how the trial unfolds. It then goes into a discussion really of piece by piece and item by item, and unfolding through the conversations in the court of precisely what the historian's trade is, what historians are expected to do, which is to base everything that they do within context, within factual evidence, within basis of actual things that happened and occurred and that can be tracked as such, and to measure that against what actually was done by Irving in his various books on Hitler and on history. And what becomes really clear as you go through this is that he is a Hitler apologist. He is a Nazi sympathizer. He is an anti-Semite. He is an inventor of places and developments and historical concepts and developments that didn't exist. He is a deliberate misquoter, and he is also an extrapolator, meaning that he takes pieces of evidence, pieces of things that people said, and from that he builds tremendous castles in the air. And what this 4-month trial does is it picks apart his research, such as it was, item by item, artifact by artifact, document by document, piece by piece, until the entire house of cards on which he built his books and on which he built his reputation is left lying in tatters in the courtroom. It's not done in a particularly nasty fashion. It's done in a mostly low-key fashion. He represents himself, which I think was probably a tremendous mistake, but that's his decision. And at the end of this, you are left still wondering, even though I know how it's going to end, how the judge is going to rule, and more specifically, what the judge is going to say about the evidence that was presented to him in the courtroom over the course of these 4 months. And the judge himself issues a more than 300-page statement about what his conclusions are, given the evidence presented by both sides. And it is a dramatic, really goosebump inducing on my part as I read through it again. Explication of what truth is, of why evidence matters, of why history matters, of why narrative based in fact and based in actual events and based in actual developments is what we have to deal with. And it does this in a really, really spectacular fashion. I guess the only thing I would want to say before I turn it over to David and to Dr. Patterson and Dr. Patterson's remarks is that the masterclass aspects of how one does history aside, this really is probably one of the strongest pleas for truth, evidence, and honesty in approach to historical material that I've ever seen, and it really is phenomenal. And with that, I'll leave you on the basic discussion of the book itself, and I turn it over to David.
Sara, thank you very much. Next, Dr. David Patterson, if you would pick up from there.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Sara, for that excellent outline synopsis of the book, what it's about, where it leads, what's at stake. It's a perfect intro to my own remarks. A striking part of this, the title of this book is History on Trial. Now, how do you put history on trial? What does this mean? I think where history is on trial, humanity, the meaning of humanity, who we are as human beings is on trial. Memory is on trial. Two of the most famous Holocaust survivors, Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi, independently of each other, described the Holocaust as a war against memory. Not just memory of what happened, but memory of what is at stake, memory of the dearness of the human being, memory of a radical assault on the soul of the human being, the meaning of the human being. So to deny or minimize, denial, by the way, runs on a spectrum. It's not just, oh, it didn't happen. To deny it, minimize the Holocaust, trivialize it, relativize it, or otherwise de-Judaize it, is to become an accomplice in the war against memory and in the murder of a people. It amounts to murdering them again, robbing them of their deaths. The Holocaust denier, like David Irving and others, are literal grave robbers. They would deprive these Jews who didn't have a grave of their graves. Their grave was the sky. The sky is transformed into a cemetery here. The trial that Lipstadt Professor Lipstadt went through, it was not just about what happened, it's about what's happening and what is on the horizon. And she's very much aware of this. In the last couple of pages, in the end of the book, she points this out, that Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism are rampant in many parts of the world. She mentions the Middle East in particular. She mentions Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, by name. Mahmoud Abbas wrote a doctoral dissertation called The Other Side, arguing that the Jews wildly inflate the numbers of those murdered, and the ones who were murdered by the Jews. In other words, the Jews were behind it in order to spur the Zionist movement, to force Jews of Europe out of Europe and into what would become Israel. Abdelaziz Rantisi, she mentions, the head of Hamas, the former head of Hamas, also Holocaust denier, and I could name others, is the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a government, denies the Holocaust, which is tied to an agenda to annihilate the Jewish state. Okay? In many cases, the Holocaust deniers would love to see it happen. And all of the anti-Semitic canards that go with this denial, that the blood libel charge, namely that Jews go out at night, particularly during Passover or Purim, murder the children who are non-Jewish, take their blood and consume their blood. This is an accusation that comes from European history. I might mention also Article 20 of the PLO Charter, drafted in 1968, says there is no evidence that the Jews ever had a historical presence in the land, what is Israel. They were never there. Mahmoud Abbas, whom I mentioned, made such a statement before the UN about a month ago. The Jews were never there. This denial of the Jewish presence in history is an effort to eliminate the Jews from a presence in geography, namely the Jewish state. It's to remove the Jews from space and time, from existence. And it continues to be widespread. In our own time, our own culture, this anti-Zionism is particularly fashionable, if not morally required, in academia and other quarters of the intelligentsia, on university campuses where I live, and where I see it, where it wraps itself in moral indignation. I know from my own experience, there are many quarters of academia where you cannot be considered a moral person if you support the existence of the Jewish state, not the policies. This anti-Zionism is not about, the policies of the Netanyahu government. It's about the existence of the Jewish state. And you see this, for example, in the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which was founded in 2005, supposedly to punish Israel economically for their actions against the Palestinians. But the founder, Omar Barghouti, says that the aim is to destroy the Jewish state. Among the major proponents of BDS on campuses are Students for Justice in Palestine, with whom I have some experience. You may recall also the BDS proponents in Berkeley, just recently, Berkeley Law School, about 10 student organizations last fall determined they will have no Zionist on campus to speak. Of course, Zionist is code word, not such a code, but for Jews. Just this last commencement, Fatima Muhammad of the CUNY Law School. Commencement speech was a diatribe against the Jews, steeped in self-righteousness and met with applause. Okay? So this is where anti-Semitism becomes dangerous, it seems to me, when it becomes not just acceptable, but, as I say, morally required. when it is cloaked in the discourse of righteous indignation and moral outrage. So what is it about? Anti-Semitism in its current fashionable form is anti-Zionism. This goes back to historically 1975 when UN Resolution 3379 was Zionism is racism. Zionists are racist. Judaism is racism. Jews are racist. Okay? And this has found its way into academia. But the Jews, of course, are not a race. Anti-Semitism is not reducible to bigotry or racism or xenophobia, although that's often in the mix. Jews are not a race. The jihadists are not racist. You know, right? The jihadists are not racist. It's not about race. Many of them are Semites. Even the Nazis' definition of the Jew did not reduce the Jew to a racial category. A Jew, under the Nuremberg laws of 1935, Article 2, Section 2, is anyone with it says one or two, Jewish grandparents. And the grandparent is Jewish if the grandparent belonged to a religious congregation. Okay. Also, Article 5, Section 2 determines that anyone who is converted to Judaism is a Jew under the law, full-blood Jew. So it's not even the Nazis vis-a-vis the Jews don't reduce the policy to a racist policy. I might say now that the Nazis were not anti-Semites because they were racist. They were racist because they were anti-Semites. They had to establish an anti-Semitic, anti-Judaic basis for understanding human in order to arrive at a racist outlook. And I'll comment on that in just a second, a little further. But why? Why the Jews? Why do they hate the Jews? There's a scene in the movie The Book Thief about a little girl in Nazi Germany who was taken in by a family when her mother was sent to prison as a communist. And the family is hiding a young Jewish guy in their basement. One day, Liesel, the little girl, sees the Gestapo hauling off a Jewish shopkeeper and roughing up her foster father. And she goes down to the basement to Max, the Jew, and says, "Why do they hate my father? Why do they hate the Jews?" And Max answers her, "Because we remind them of their humanity." What are you reminded of when you're reminded of your humanity? Why would you hate someone for reminding you? And why is it that the Jews remind you? The Jews, fundamental dimension, defining dimension of our humanity is our infinite responsibility to and for the other human being, as taught by in the Jewish tradition, by the Torah, the Bible. For much of the world, the Jews are the most ancient witnesses to this teaching concerning our infinite responsibility. The Jews allow us no sleep. They allow us no sleep. Jew hatred is hatred of the first question put to the first human, "Where are you?" It's ayeka, it's an outcry. It's not just where, but how could you? It's a cry of anguish on God's part, and it's tied to the questions God puts to the firstborn, Cain. Where's your brother, and what have you done? The Jewish people represent this kind of questioning from God to humanity. And it's above all a question of the one who, a hatred of the one who asks the question. Jew hatred is God hatred. It's hatred of the God that calls me to a reckoning that I can never live up to. As Hitler himself said to his friend Hermann Rauschning in the mid-1920s, his ultimate aim as Führer would be to destroy the God of the Jews and his life-denying 10 commandments. It's the commanding God that is the object of hatred, and it's the Jewish people as the witnesses who have to be destroyed to destroy God. The commandment, I suggest, the commandment perhaps most hated is the one that appears most frequently 36 times in the Torah, we're commanded to treat the stranger with loving kindness, with care, with concern. There's a line that says, it's Leviticus chapter 19, verse 34. It's the V'ahavta l'ger kamocha. You shall love the stranger as yourself. The same wording as love your neighbor. A better translation, as yourself, kamocha, would be that is who you are. In other words, who you are as a human being lies in your loving treatment, not feeling, but treatment of the stranger. Not just the neighbor. The neighbor, okay, fine. He looks like me, talks like me, same political party, no problem. The stranger, this weird one, got nothing to do with me, talks funny, God forbid, different political party. I don't want to have anything to do with them. We need to be reminded, because the stranger is not so strange. The stranger is, in Hebrew, a human being, a ben Adam, a child of Adam. The stranger is a brother or a sister to me. As a child of Adam, we all have the same father. The rabbis say, why does God start with one and not two? And one answer is, so that no one can say it to somebody else, my side of the family is better than your side. There's only one side. We're all family. And with all of the ethical demands that come with that relationship, with that connection. Anti-Semitism is about a basic disconnection from the other, the other race, the other ethnicity, the other nationality. You can see how this Jewish teaching undermines any thinking that situates race, nationality, ethnicity at the center of what defines a human, at the center of what determines the holiness of a human. So I think you can see that, as I suggested, anti-Semitism is not a form of racism. Racism is a form of anti-Semitism. In other words, you have to be anti this teaching about our fundamental connectedness in order to become a racist. That's what the anti-Semite is anti, the teaching and the testimony concerning our profound physical and metaphysical, our profound ethical bond with each other. It's made of an infinite responsibility. And I think this tells us also perhaps why what begins with the Jews does not end with the Jews. And let me just close with a couple of thoughts about what anti-Semitism has to do with not just the Jews, but each of us as a human being, as a child of Adam, a ben Adam. Elie Wiesel, whom I mentioned at the outset, he once said that there comes a time when one cannot remain human without assuming the Jewish condition. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you have to be a Jew. And the Jewish condition is not a condition of being a victim. It's a condition of a witness, of saying, here I am, of being called to the stand, of answering the outcry of our fellow human being, of being able to say, you know, here I am for you. When God cries out, where are you? When God asks me, where's your brother? And what have you done? As he asks the first murderer. How we answer is what is at stake when history is on trial. And when history is on trial, we are on trial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for those very poignant remarks. I'd like us now to go to Pastor Washington. Before I do, I've got to tell you, I've got a quote I would like to read to our audience from your website. Sure. It is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. He was quoted as saying, "It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers." That was a letter from a Birmingham jail. Pastor Washington, who's been to Israel many, many times, many missions, please.
And thank you, Gary and Charles, and David and Sara as well. Great to be with you all again. I'll start with that quote, since you read that there, Gary. Yes, absolutely. Dr. King wrote that 1963 letter from Birmingham jail. And the point that he was making, among others, was disobeying unrighteous laws. He was actually making the case for civil disobedience. And this is why he was arrested. Of course, they had been protesting. And he was saying that legally, just because something is legal doesn't make it moral. And then he went to Hitler's Germany. He said it was illegal to comfort a Jew. Right? These things were codified. It wasn't just the hate that David so eloquently spoke to. It wasn't just the systemic discrimination that Sara had outlined and that obviously Dr. Lipstadt shared in her book, but it was the codifying of that thing, right? So it was illegal to help. So people like, of course, Mr. Schindler, to their own peril or potential peril, help the Jewish people. I'm always amazed that when I go to Yad Vashem, and I shared this with our group when we were just there just a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that in that hallowed ground, our Jewish brothers and sisters have made a section for the righteous among the nations. That our Jewish brothers and sisters, as I said to them, have acknowledged, even though theirs is a hatred they've known for thousands of years, the oldest hatred, they have acknowledged those who are not Jewish, who stood with and helped and did what they could. And we talked about that as such a beacon in that sense. One of the things that struck me, and I'll touch on Dr. King there again, Gary, is the amorphous nature of it. So the book was, obviously, it's meticulous. She does an amazing job. It was frustrating, not the author. The frustrating is that the antagonist is David Irving, who, like a slithering eel, he even referred to himself as an eel at some point. He takes on different forms, which is that type of hatred. Right? I'll borrow from the biblical reference that David had made when we talk about it. We share this with our organization, with our young people and our pastors. The oldest hatred, that when Pharaoh got up in the opening pages of Shemot, of Exodus, and decides that he's going to institute first a pogrom and then a sort of extermination policy. There was nothing that was the impetus for it. Nothing had happened. He said this might happen. It was the first conspiracy theory against the Hebrews, right? They might overthrow us. They might. And based on what might happen, he began to persecute and obviously at some point begins to kill the children. He is a Hitler. Thousands of years before there's a Hitler, there's Hitler, right? You see this mindset that's there, which is one of the reasons why we, in the clerical circles, call it the oldest hatred. It was systemic. Not only that, it was codified. These were laws that were placed in place. It wasn't just the hatred, but it was the king saying, these people are lesser people. These people are not worthy of humanity. These people, there are too many of them. All these different things, right? They are the other, and he objectifies them. It's amazing to me that in my talking with my rabbi friends and what the sages have commented on it. I don't know if it was Rashi or if it was Rambam, but one of them talked about the fact that when the Pharaoh began to institute this pogrom, that it was directed at the Hebrews. But by the time the babies were thrown in the Nile, they said that he did not say, throw the Hebrew babies in the Nile. He said, throw the babies in the Nile, because the magicians came to Pharaoh and said, the Messiah, quote, has been born, the deliverer of the people, but we don't know if he's Hebrew or Egyptian. And the silence of the Egyptians, while the initial program began, came back on them, because when they did not defend their Hebrew brothers and sisters. When Pharaoh, in his maniacal reign, began to then kill the babies, the sages let us know that it was both Egyptians and Hebrews that were being killed. Going back to what David said, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. Back to Dr. King. His fight against anti-Semitism and then anti-Zionism, he even rebuked one of the students who were using Zionists in that pejorative way. He said, when you're talking that way, you're talking anti-Semitism. He was a sage for many reasons, and may have foresaw where we are now. because what Dr. King was doing was pushing back on what he knew was the oldest hatred, not just because the Jews were overrepresented in the civil rights struggle, which they were, and he gave full credit for that, but because he understood as a man of the cloth, as a very wise person, that fire, once it begins to burn, will destroy everything. And so he rebuked anti-Semitism. He rebuked anti-Zionism. He defended the Jews. He defended Israel's right to defend itself, all of these things. And it put him, obviously, in the crosshairs of those who hated the Jews and those who hated Israel. As a matter of fact, some of his most staunch support for Israel was after the 1967 war, regardless to what the revisionist historians like David Irving have said. Dr. King continued to defend not only that, his wife, who died in 2005, I believe, continued to also support Israel. So for all the people who said he would have changed his mind, well, at least we have his wife who continued to stand with Israel. We stood at the Coretta Scott King Forest in the northern part of the Galilee. And so I, as the author was explaining each issue, you could see the cycle. During the trial, this issue, some sort of detail about Birkenau, some detail about Auschwitz, whatever. And every time in the book, David Irving would have some sort of reason, some sort of explanation. I didn't mean this when I said that. This meant this. This meant that. And well, you're misquoting me. And even when they had him dead to rights, he at times did with a great deal of arrogance and a great deal of I'll say it as a pastor, we see those things as very, in the clergy sense, right? It's a very, I have to use this word, almost demonic presence there, right? He's just slithering and slithering. And so you said this, oh, I didn't mean that. And to your point too about hatred, he hated black people. He would make common cause with Aryans and with, white supremacists, these types of things, right? These were all part of who he was. Dr. King understood that as well. It was frustrating when I use that word because each time you felt that, okay, they got him. They had him dead to rights. No. And he would change, even to the point where the judge, Deborah mentioned several times, she was aghast that the judge would sometimes, they were kind of like buddies almost, like, oh yeah, you know what, it's okay, yeah, I understand, almost like, do you want a water, you want some juice, you want some, that type of thing, right? So she's watching them form this relationship. And because he's apparently, I don't think she ever uses the word charismatic, but it's implied, right? There's something about him. I'll never forget a dear friend of mine. She is Sephardic, or the Mizrahi Jew. Her father fled Egypt when Mein Kampf became a bestseller. Her mom suffered the Farhoods in Iraq. And so when we're talking about the Jewish people as a diaspora people, Africa, Asia, Europe, and the pogroms, nothing like what happened in the Holocaust, of course, but the hatred for the Jews universally, right? We've seen these things. My friend told me a story, and I'll probably end with this here. There is, her mother, her grandmother, was actually both Iraqi and also British. She would come to visit every once in a while, them in Baghdad. And the Grand Mufti had visited. There was some big dinner that he was the guest of honor. And now her grandmother was a very, very proud Jewish woman. She knew about, obviously, the Dhimmi laws and those types of things, but she was also a product of the West, right? So she wasn't having any of that. You were going to speak down to her. She put you in your place and all your anti-Semitic stuff. She was just a real firebrand. She said they went to the dinner. She told me this story. Her grandmother is at the dinner that's in honor of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem there. And he sat there at the dinner, very calmly, suave and debonair, spoke like Adolf Hitler about the destruction of the Jews, just hatred, but it oozed from his mouth like silk. She said her grandmother, for the first time, was afraid of someone. She said she had never been afraid, but the way he sat there and talked about, yes, of course, in 1941, that very famous picture of him and Adolf Hitler sitting in Berlin together, obviously planning those things, which speaks to, I was waiting for Deborah to do that part, but of course, this book had to deal with a lot of different things. I'm saying to myself, tell him about the time when Hitler, so of course, like she needs help from me, right? But I'll never forget that story. I'll never forget that story, and let me end this here. This book, I believe, was published about 2005, early 2000s. The amorphous nature of who a David Irving was as a composite figure is alive and well on our college campuses, in the corporate world, you name it. Zionism is racism, and it has become, and is, with social media and everything, such a fast-moving train. It is enveloping so much. And I don't mean I'm not Chicken Little. Our organization exists because we believe very positively there's some positive things we can do to impact. We mean the words of the Black community and others as well. But we're also very clear-minded and sober about this. When this book was written nearly 20 years ago, the landscape has changed even more so now. So anti-Zionists or anti-Semites, and they'll speak. It's amazing because Israel is mentioned sparingly, but a few times in the book. And I remember one passage talked about the attacks on Jews and who they are, these negative things in the West Bank. She even used the term West Bank. It's actually in the book, meaning that here are all the anti-Semitic, here are the tropes that we use against the Jewish people, and then that gets applied to Israel. So of course, whether it's a Netanyahu, whether it's the Likud or any of the different parties or whatever, it doesn't really matter. For the Jew haters and Israel haters, it doesn't matter if it's a right-leaning government, left-leaning government, makes absolutely no difference. It's the Jewish state. When we around this table say the Jewish state, we're talking about the Jewish homeland. When they say Jewish state, they mean some sort of Nazi regime in which the Jews are doing to the Palestinians what was actually done to them, those types of heinous, putrid things, but they are taught on campuses, not just in the quad. These are taught by professors. These are taught by, this is actually happening now in ways even much more so than was true even less than 20 years ago. And I think that's part of the difficulty that we face now in pushing back that, because those things are very, very much alive and well. Hatred for the Jewish people, hatred for Israel, and how those things just are so melded in so many different ways.
I would appreciate if you would, having visited Israel so many times, having taken Israelis to African nations, having taken people from African countries to Israel, having taken Americans to Israel, blacks and whites, I found it fascinating to be studying the fact that there are many Jews in Israel who are black, who don't look like the image most Americans have of a white Jew. That there are Jews in Israel from Yemen, from many of the Arab nations who have fled. You've met with some of these people, and you have taken many of these missions. Could you tell us something about your mission and your purpose there?
The existence of the modern state of Israel, with some 100 nations represented, people who have made Aliyah, along with the Sabra, those who've been there for generation to generation. I mean, even after those who know the ancient history, even after the Roman destruction of Judea and renaming it Palestine, there's always been a remnant of the Jewish people still in the land. But of course, in the modern day, whether, again, making Aliyah from I'm saying Aliyah, so making sure returning to Israel, the home, as their homeland. For those who are watching, I'm saying the word Aliyah. It's a Hebrew word meaning to go up. But it is also used to mean to immigrate, those who've come from America, North and South America, those who come from Ethiopia, those who come from Yemen, as you said, those who come from Iraq, which is ancient day Babylon, Iran, where you can't really immigrate from Iran, but I'm sure we can maybe unpack that a little bit more as well. But of course, there are Persian Jews in Israel and all of those things. It is an amazing thing, and as a pastor, Gary, it is a reminder of all these nations in Zion, right? Zion, the symbolic word for Israel, of course, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. And it is always gratifying to, when I'm there with people who've never been before, they are completely blown away when they see not just Jews from all over the world who've returned, now the third generation who've returned to Israel, but of course the Arab population, Arab Christians, Arab Muslims. One of the comments that I get the most, whether in Tel Aviv, whether in Jerusalem, whether in Galilee, whether in Haifa, wherever, they see this multi-ethnic, multi-religious peaceful coexistence in the Jewish state, right? Here is the Jewish homeland, and you have different people that are there, different religions, different ethnicities, right? And it is the greatest, if there is a panacea, for those who have these other ideas about what Israel actually is. There's bomb shelters everywhere, or there's genocide happening. All this happening. None of those things are true. The Isaiah text of light to the nations. So when we intentionally go to the holy sites, go to these ancient sites. We intentionally see the technical, right? We go to Rambam Hospital in Haifa. We go to Save a Child's Heart out there in Tel Aviv, Innovation Africa. We see all of these amazing things that this tiny nation does to bless the world, right? I intentionally introduced them to Dr. David Skoresi, who is a nephrologist there in Rambam, who's working on a cure for African-American kidney disease, an Israeli doctor who, when he was as a doctor here in the States, saw the high levels of kidney disease among the African-American population. It was always something that was on his heart. He began to do the work, and they've actually figured out what the actual cause is, an African sleep gene. It's a whole discussion about DNA, and I take those pastors and those leaders there so they can see with their own eyes, this is what Israel is. This is the nation. So Gary, I love doing it. People ask me all the time, do you get tired of, I look at my calendar, I'll go there 5 times this year. and I'm looking I'll be there again in a few weeks. And so, yeah, it is an amazing thing. People, if they see it, then they understand.
Wonderful, thank you. Charles, I think you have some questions that have popped up.
Yes, first I'd like to thank our panelists from Israel and from North Carolina and from Dallas, and coming together and sharing with us your thoughts, your insights on this important question that is currently, as the fire has begun to burn, Pastor, as you said. We've had several questions, one of which I want to try and frame it. We have acknowledged this morning, this afternoon, that the anti-Semitism today is fueled by the anti-Zionism, by the anti-Israelism, whatever you want to call it, about the Jewish state of Israel. I think people are asking questions of is criticism of Israel anti-Semitic? Is it a form of anti-Semitism? How can you express your displeasure with a policy of the government of Israel and not be anti-Semitic? I know I've read this in many articles, I've confronted it, and we have questions along that line. I'd like to open that up to a panel discussion. How can you criticize a policy of Israel and not be accused of being anti-Semitic? Does that involve the 3 Ds? Does that involve the International Holocaust Remembrance definition? So I see a hand that came up quickly from our distinguished Professor Abosch. Why don't you start the discussion, Sara?
Sure. I think it's actually, I think people make that a much more complicated issue or question than it is or than it needs to be. Questioning the policies of a particular government is legitimate and fair game for anybody who wants to. And let's bring it home to what we know. Is it okay to question the policies of the Biden administration? Is it okay to question particular laws that have been promulgated through the Biden administration's executive branch? Absolutely. That's different from questioning the legitimacy of the government of the United States or of the government of Israel, and particularly the problem lies when you question whether Israel has the right to exist. That steps immediately into anti-Semitic territory. If you question the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state, which was how internationally it was conceived of, when it was voted into existence in the United Nations. That is anti-Semitism. So it's not that you can't question the same kinds of things you would be questioning, I want to say here in the United States, but I'm not sitting here in the United States. The same way you would question our own government, it's perfectly legitimate to question the policies and politicians and politics of Israel's government. But when you question the right of the United States to continue to exist, when you question the right of Israel to continue to exist, then you have stepped into illegitimacy territory, and that's unacceptable.
David, Pastor, would you like to add anything?
Yes, the language of criticism is very important here. What are the terms invoked? Is it that I don't think the Israeli government should enact this policy because it's going to make them more vulnerable on this border or that border? It might threaten the existence of the state, right? That's legitimate. And the language is always crucial. When people flee danger from parts of the world, Venezuela, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Ukraine, they're refugees. When the Jews flee for their lives from the Arab countries after the War of Independence, Soviet Russia, Eastern Europe, they're colonialists. Okay? This is the language of demonization. And central to the language that the anti-Zionists would like to legitimize are words like colonialist, racist, apartheid, Nazis. These terms are calculated to incite, not to inform or even to persuade, but to incite hatred. And you can see that the language of the criticism often will tip you off as to where it's coming from, whether it's anti-Semitic or not anti-Semitic. And just the phrase, just my last comment, the right to exist, kind of is problematic to me. I mean, of what other country would you raise the question? Does Bolivia have a right to exist? Does Spain have a right to exist? I mean, it's a nonsense question in any other instance except Israel.
Could I add a thought? I think here in America, we view Israel as the only other major democracy. Well, Great Britain, of course, but Israel is an important place and it's a democracy. And we tend to judge Israel by assuming it should be the same democracy as the United States. Their Supreme Court should be like ours. Their government should be like ours. But in fact, the United States that Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison formed was for a very different purpose. It was for an independence form of government, a freedom from Great Britain, a self-governance was an issue. The State of Israel was created by the United Nations to save the Jewish people, in part, certainly. Its democracy is different. And when we judge other people, when we judge another country, it's as bad as my judging maybe how Charles raised his children or his judging how I raised mine, okay? We have different houses. We have different families. We have different spouses. We have different experiences. So I think to some extent, Americans, when we judge Israel, should study our own history a bit and study the history and the purpose of Israel. And because we've talked about this book, I feel compelled. I have to read to you a quote from the book, from one of the witnesses, okay? Because I find it, this denial of Israel, the denial of Jews to exist, so disturbing, okay? One of the architectural historians, as he was describing the gas chambers and the immolation of the Jews, he wrote that the SS chased prisoners who were not working fast enough into a pit near the crematorium that was full of boiling human fat. At that time, the corpses were incinerated in open-air pits from which the fat flowed into a separate reservoir. The fat was poured over the corpses to accelerate their combustion. This poor devil was pulled out of the fat still alive and then shot. And you spoke about the fact that most of those people who died, most of those Jews who had died, don't have graves. Their graves are the sky. They were immolated. They were destroyed in that manner. How vicious, how horrible that was, and how important it is that we focus on solving this problem today. We will never completely solve anti-Semitism, but I'm looking to the lawyers in our audience, because we make the laws, we form the judiciary, we enforce the laws, and as Pastor Washington said, there were German laws that were enforced by German judges that sentenced 80,000 people to death by courts of law who never should have been tried for such matters.
So let me, one of the topics that keeps coming up, and we read it in the media that the anti-Semitism is coming from the far right. Some people think it's coming from other sources. Pastor, where do you see the anti-Semitism today coming from?
Everywhere. So I use the term amorphous on purpose. I'm not to beat a dead horse, but I'll take it back to David Irving in the book. He became whatever he needed to become to push his agenda. What was his agenda? Holocaust denial. And why? Well, Holocaust deniers, excuse my explanation, want to see another Holocaust. The only reason why you deny the genocide happened is because you're helping to facilitate another one, right? This would be true in Rwanda. This would be true in the Congo. This is definitely true when it comes to the Jewish people, right? Those who deny that it ever happened have a vested interest in that. And so I see it, it's coming from everywhere. The part of it from our vantage point, and I say this often in our organization, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, is that where it is often often not detected as much, particularly over the last decade or so, is from the far left. Right? Far right, as she discards in the book, the Nazis, neo-Nazis, which is obviously what David Irving, he's like, again, makes common cause, his hatred for black people, all of these things, right? And of course the Nazis, what they called the Rhineland bastards, right? We know in terms of history, they killed Afro-Germans. When I say far left, now I'm talking about in academia. I'm talking about in certain sections of our political identity. We meaning Americans, in the State Department, not the State Department, I'm sorry, in the Capitol, state Capitol, was the first observance of Nakba Day, right? Of course, it was done by Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman out of Michigan, but when it was shut down in the House, Bernie Sanders allowed her to have the Nakba Day event in the Senate, in the state capitol. For the people who weren't aware of it, and Nakba Day, of course, is the Arabic word for catastrophe. Those who aren't aware of the independence of the state of Israel. Those types of things have been happening on college campuses across the country. I've made this statement often, and I'm going to make it again. I didn't make it here, but I'll say it again, that in our opinion, the greatest incubator of this type of Jew hatred is in our college campuses, our universities and campuses. It is institutional.
Is that flowing down into the lower grades?
Yes, absolutely. So the types of things that these young people are being taught on college campuses, that Israel's an apartheid state, lie. Israel's committing genocide against the Palestinians, lie. Israel was settled as a settler, colonial, occupational, all of these things. They're learning this as curriculum. I'm from California. One of the parts of that curriculum is the critical ethnic studies model. It is a behemoth. We've debated it. We've gone to the school board meetings and everything, right? Parts of that's at the college level. There is a high school version of that now, and there's the middle grades version of that now. They are learning that white people are privileged, Jewish people are privileged, therefore, because they're privileged, they need to be discriminated against, and Israel is a white privileged nation. They're learning these things for grade. They're learning these things systematically. You talk about systematic racism or systematic anti-Semitism, this is happening. And because there's still an incredulity among many in leadership, it is happening and spreading like wildfire. So what was made, that particular curriculum was made law in 2020 by the governor of California. There are forms of it throughout the United States. It is everywhere. It's in the Pacific Northwest. It's in the Midwest. And it is fomenting a Jew hatred that is not really being recognized. When I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense, or even in some sort of arrogant, people don't see what we see, we're saying it's not talked about very much, right? It's easier to talk about, not easy, but it's more fashionable to talk about far right, right? And we need to, right? But the problem is that on these campuses, which are pretty much dominated by left and progressive politics, which is not a bad thing necessarily, I'm saying that it has morphed into social. Now you are a true social justice person. If you are anti-Zionist, if you're anti-Semitic, if you are espousing these things, you cannot be a self-respecting, good moral person and support Israel, right? Not just Netanyahu, Israel, period. And not the 67 lines. They're on the campuses saying, we don't want 48, we want all of it. This is a mantra on the campuses, meaning 1948 was just an abomination, and it needs to be destroyed. It just needs to be an Arab-Palestinian state. These things are happening on the campuses, and it's only going faster and faster.
So in the time that we have remaining, each of you has been invited because you represent a different aspect of society. I would like to ask you, because one of the purposes of this talk today that as Gary talked about and others, we see it coming. We see, as the pastor said, the fire is burning. I'd like to ask each of you, in the 10 minutes remaining, in your organization, how is your organization confronting this rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism? And in that connection, if you could share your thoughts on the U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism that was issued by the Biden administration in May, and some of what their goal is, how they approach it. I know this is going to take more than 10 minutes. And some of the organizations that they may have referred to, including CARE. I will start with Sara. Sara, the Holocaust Center is a fabulous institution. I know that it is keenly aware of anti-Semitism. Talk to us for a couple of minutes about the Holocaust Center, your concerns, what keeps you up at night, and what's the Holocaust Center doing for us in the face of this fire?
All while standing on one leg. Okay, here we go. So the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum it presents the Holocaust and the history of the Holocaust and the fallout after the Holocaust as its paradigm of genocide. But it doesn't stop there. It links the Holocaust via the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the emergence of the international military tribunals and the concepts of representational justice, and the emergence of the Genocide Convention, all of which come out of the Holocaust in 47, 48, to America and our responsibility as Americans. I mean, what we're specifically talking about is what we call American ideals, reality, and repair. In other words, what our foundational ideals are, what the reality has been for many different groups of Americans, and how we as American citizens work together through our democratic system to bring our reality more closely into accord with our foundational ideals. So that's kind of how we knit all of this together. So the Holocaust doesn't kind of stand on its own. We don't stop talking about Jews in the Holocaust and then move into current day America. You know, Jews continue as a people, as a group throughout all of this. How do we deal with this educationally? Because we are an educational institution, is as follows. We teach workshops on the history of the Holocaust, on the history of anti-Semitism, on the connection between the two, on anti-Semitism as the world's oldest hatred, on why it originally emerged about 3,000 years ago, why it continued throughout the medieval period, why in a post-Holocaust world it continues to have incredible staying power and incredible explanatory power for many people in terms of what they see in their own lives, and why it continues as a hatred. We teach what we call upstander behavior, and this gets back to what David was saying about, you know, all Jews and all human beings are responsible for all other Jews and all other human beings. This notion of humanity. We teach students who come through the museum, adults who come through the museum, this concept of an upstander, that it's not enough to see something wrong. When you see something wrong, you must stand up for those around you. You must stand up for yourself. You must work to fix things, to bring justice to all kinds of issues. Beyond that, we issue current statements about anti-Semitism, about racism, about related hatreds when these things rise their ugly heads in our particular community. And there's much more that we do, but
I understand that there's more to say.
Not
Y'all
the time or
doing
the
a
place,
fantastic
so.
job. So we have about 6 minutes. And David, you deal in the universities, you travel the world, you see anti-Semitism. Tell us, the Ackerman Center is a Holocaust center. And just in a couple of minutes, how is you and the Ackerman Center helping to address this fire?
Well, I offer courses and seminars on anti-Semitism from the undergraduate through the Ph.D. level. I work with the Vice President for Student Affairs about organizations such as Students for Justice in Palestine. I've arranged for the Academic Engagement Network, who does workshops for college administrators and other things, to come in. And we did a workshop for the administrators. A huge problem is that the administrators themselves know, in many cases, I would say most cases, know very little about this. It's not that they're hostile. They're
just
not.
ignorant.
They're uninformed.
So you're educating the administration on the campuses,
Yeah.
and working with those organizations to make the campuses more aware, like CUNY.
Yes, and I also work with the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, which is based at Cambridge University, and we do a lot of programming, not only for, but largely for college professors and policy makers. Our people have met with the State Department, Department of Education, to try to inform. But I don't know, informing alone is not quite enough unless we're all coming from a common ground concerning the absolute sanctity of the other human being. Without that as a premise, more education just makes you more dangerous.
So we have to be more activists.
Yeah, and
So
speak up.
being an
Say something.
activist, you're not in the ivory tower, Pastor.
Yes, sir.
Tell us quickly how you are addressing this and helping to put this fire out.
Well, exactly. So we're on the street level, which is, and of course, it all works together. We draw from the amazing work of people like Sara, like David, what they do, and we get the information. And so one of the things our organization does, whether it's pastors in their cities across the country, whether it's with other men and women, our organization, the trip that Gary referred to, we just returned from Israel just a couple of weeks ago. It was part of a 9-month expedition, if you will, not in Israel, because we were there about 10 days, but we do what's called a peace initiative. It's an acronym for Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, where we have recruited young black men and women across the country from different fields, some academia, some entrepreneurs, and everything, and they actually go through a 9-month journey. Each month we come together, we unpack different topics related to Israel, ancient Israel, modern Israel, United Nations, and we take 2 trips. We do one, we say December is the motherland, June is the Holy Land, right? We went to South Africa in December, and it was an amazing trip in which we're doing everything from unpacking the Israel apartheid lie to actually seeing the black and Jewish community. We just real quick thing, for example, we went to the Jewish Museum in Cape Town, and among the many things that we did, we sat there and watched a documentary in which Nelson Mandela praised the Jewish community for its help in dismantling both the apartheid system and building South Africa. So some of the same things that Dr. King said about the Jewish community, Nelson Mandela said. We went there and touched the ground and saw it. And then, of course, we went to Israel and the other part of that. Why do we do that? So that they can be effective advocates, so they can combat anti-Semitism where they are and in their spheres and their circles, and also, obviously, champion what we see as has been a synergy between the black and Jewish community for decades.
You got one more participant? Let me know when the next trip is.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Maybe 2.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to turn it over to Gary, but I once again want to thank all 3 of you for participating. I know we could go on for many more hours, and for the people that are watching, as we've concluded here, it's education, it's knowledge, and it's activism. Silence is not acceptable today. Gary, why don't you conclude this program?
All right, so for the lawyers, you will have on your screen something showing you the barcode number for your continuing legal education. But also afterwards, if you haven't read the book, please read the book. Our library has it available. If you want it online, if you want to buy it, buy it. I did, and I took my notes from it. Watch the movie. It isn't as exact as the book, but it is an excellent, honest portrayal. I spoke to Deborah Lipstadt's lawyer, and he said, read the judge's opinion. 350 pages. I'm going to make that available to the bar. It is an important legal document. There's important legal strategies. The trial lawyer never looked at David Irving when he spoke to him. He did not want, he wanted to convince the judge how dismissive he was of this person. That's an important trial tactic. Many of you are trial lawyers. I'm sure you know better trial tactics than that, but there's an awful lot to learn in that, and we will make some resources available that the bar will publish and have available to you. I want to thank all of you for staying with us today. I want to again thank our panel and the bar for having us.
Thank you for putting it together, Gary.